Welcome to this Superversive SF Roundtable, where we're talking about the launch of our new Planetary Anthology, so Love and Venus. We have the editors April Freeman and El Judgy Lamplighter right here. So, Judgy, would you like to take it away?
Certainly. First, I'd like to welcome some of our authors who have shown up, including Mona Lisa Foster and Edward Willett and Walter Hayes, and Julie Frost. If I've pronounced anybody's name wrong, please correct me. So first, just to talk just a little bit about the project before we get into the specifics. The Planetary Anthology series is a series of anthologies with short stories about each of the planets and one or two other things like the sun, with a theme. So each anthology can be about the planet, the god related to the planet, or the theme, and they're supposed to kind of tie it together. So ours in particular was Venus, which is why we released it for Valentine's Day. And so we had stories about love involving, or touching on the planet, the goddess, or just love. And one of the delightful things about the anthology was that some of the stories that came in were romance stories, and some of them touched on love that was not romance. And I thought it made a nice kind of a arc. And one of our stories, we have an author here, was kind of an anti-romance story, but it involved the goddess. April, you want to say something? And maybe Edward could start because I mentioned his story.
Okay. Let's see. I'll have to say I enjoyed working on this project. It was a fun, it's a fun theme to work on, especially when you get a lot of variety of different stories. At some point I'll talk about my story that I have in there as well, or any other little details, but I think we can go ahead and start with the authors, let them tell about their stories.
Edward, do you want to go first?
Alrighty. My story is called Texente Tella Veneris, he says in very bad Latin, which means the weaver of Venice. No, that would be a different story. The weaver of Venus, or Venus's weaver. And it's an interesting background to it because this story actually began as a play script. Probably 20 years ago, Globe Theatre here in Regina, Saskatchewan, where I'm from, had a program called On the Line, a free fall through new work. And you would submit a 15-minute script, which they would put into the hands of actors who would do a modicum of rehearsal on it, and then it would be done play in hand for the audience. This was one of 3 scripts that I did for that. And the reason it has 4 people in it is because the script had to be for 2 men and 2 women. And if you think about the story in which they come up these stairs and they discover this statue of a weaver, in theatrical terms, what that translated to on stage was no set. You just had basically a person sitting in a chair representing the weaver, and the other people came up. And you'll notice in the story that when they leave the clearing, they keep coming back to the same clearing. And again, that all ties back to the fact that this was originally a single set theatrical piece. So that was interesting. Now, Venus was not a part of that original concept of it, but when Jaggy asked me if I would be interested in submitting a story for this, I went back to that because I'd never found a home for it, and I hadn't touched it in a long time. So I rewrote it completely and did some research on Venus and the different aspects of the goddess, and found that there was a connection that could be made there. And yes, it is an anti-romance story, really, in that it's 2 people who really shouldn't be together, and they actually have an opportunity, or at least the woman of the couple has the opportunity to correct a horrible mistake over the course of this, with the help of Venus, who of course is the goddess of love, and also as very much a women's goddess, is kind of on her side.
Yeah, April and I were a little torn about it at first because we're like, well, it's kind of the opposite in a way of what we're looking for, but it's a pretty good story.
Yeah, and I mean it is like
goddess, and and I thought it's funny that you say that was because it was a set, because the within the story the happening of coming back over and over again to the same place was really eerie, and it made it seem, it really added to the supernatural sense of it. So you did it, you translated it really well.
And as much as I hate seeing like any sort of story of like a marriage falling apart because it's just sad. I guess you could look at it as a way of like, not in too cheesy way, but like self-love of like, not like you're in a situation that you're miserable in and you get out of it. So,
and it particularly was good despite what your initial qualms, because what happens to the guy, he does to himself. And the girl ends up in a happier situation without herself taking any. I mean, she doesn't do anything wrong. She just ends up with a fresh start, you know. And so I thought that for that reason, you know, I like the story, even though the theme made me sad, you know. So
well, and without giving too much away, if you think about it, by the end of it, the bad relationship never actually even existed. So
exactly. So she now has
it's more of like a fresh start.
Yeah. So that you know, as I say, that's why we kind of went, okay, yeah, I think this does, and I think it's nice in an anthology to have a mix of stories. You know.
Yeah.
When we put it together, we got. Go ahead.
I was going to say, I suspected when I submitted it that it would be one of these things is not like the other stories in the anthology.
It is in some ways, you know. We had a bunch of, you know, space stories and some goddess stories, and at one point we thought of organizing it by sections. And we changed our mind. We mixed them, but you know, there is a bit of an organization, and it's that every fourth or fifth story is a kind of lighter, funny one. Other than that, they're kind of gently mixed, and I think it's kind of fun to see the theme worked in so many ways, and you know, it gives it a kind of a more of a fullness to the theme, to have it being treated, you know, what goddesses are dangerous, you know, you got to be careful, and sometimes you get an unexpected gift that you would never have asked for, but you know, so if you look at it that way, I think it was a pretty cool story. So, very cool, and I think you did a neat job of you know, translating it from the play to the.
Yeah, the play was quite different actually, so it's changed quite a bit since that initial script.
It's pretty cool. Well, thank you very much.
You're welcome. Thanks for taking the story.
It was. I think it's a addition that makes it have a lot more dimension and character to the whole thing. Of the rest of you, is there anybody who's needs to go? Julie, as you said, you were in a public place. Did you want to go next? And if you can't talk, do you want to take some time and type while somebody else is going? I guess she has to type.
For those listening that can't see, Julie's got her mic mute, so I think she's going to type it up.
Yeah,
and we can read her thoughts on it.
Why doesn't either Walter or Mona Lisa speak about their story while Julie has a chance to type a bit, and then we will go back to her and read what she's typed, and she can add to it from there. Does that sound good, Julie? You okay with that? I assume she'll give us an answer.
We're waiting for an answer from the other side.
The mystical world of Mona Lisa, would you like to go while she's having a chance to type here? Yeah, Julie says she's good with that.
Sure, thanks. So this is a side story, and it's a prequel to a world that I've been building for a while. It's a space opera, and even though it doesn't take place in the main setting that I have for the other stories, it's the prequel. It's basically a story of how the protagonist's parents met. And it's a romance because I tend to write towards romances, and it's called Enemy of Love.
It's probably the steamiest of all the stories.
Not only that, but so? It's almost the perfect
I think so.
Example. It both takes place on Venus and is a I won't say it's a traditional romance because it's very science fiction-y also, but I thought it was a perfect mix of science fiction and romance. You know, it was a nice touch for the anthology because it had the, you know, the things that I enjoy in a romance, but it also had a definite, you know, kind of a science fiction-y on Venus feel to it. So it really was a good, you know, like, I can't think of the word I want.
It's a good mix of it. It's a good mix of having both sci-fi and romance. But and the two working together very well, not seeming too lopsided in one way or the other.
Can you tell us a little bit more about your background?
About my background?
I mean the story background. About the greater universe that this story is taking place in.
So I've been working on this idea of having a saga about a bunch of space samurai running around and ruling the universe. And it's a little bit like Dune in that there's a lot of houses and they have different ways of ruling their fiefdoms. And there's an emperor that's a bad guy. And of course, Dragomir, who is the male protagonist in this short story, is the current sovereign of his house, House Dobromil. And this is how he meets the woman that he ends up marrying and having a child with. So the bigger universe is much more complex because it has all of these different houses and they do things in different ways. It's definitely more space opera than romance, but almost all of it has some aspect of romance because I guess I'm deep down, I'm a romance writer.
I've always enjoyed stories that are very science fiction, or really any sort of story that have like big adventures and romance in it. Like I'm not the kind that would just read like a romance story, but I definitely enjoy having romance in stories.
And I'm the same way.
Read romances for years. When I was young, I liked them because I could pick them up and read them quickly and put them down when I had to leave the library, and they're kind of my guilty pleasure reading. So
Joshi is like, I call Joshi our resident matchmaker and expert in all things romance.
Since April met her fiance through me, she has a slightly
and you're always trying to match idea of
but
don't deny this is my destiny.
I liked in Mona Lisa's story was that first so the setup is there's a people who are kind of hiding on Venus away from some great problem that's going on in the greater universe, and the main character is examining an area that's away from where the others are living, and she finds this crashed pilot, and you slowly begin to realize he's some kind of a super being. He can do things that normal human beings cannot do, and I just thought that was very charmingly done. Because I kind of could see it coming before the main character did, but I mean, on purpose. The story was set up that way, and I think it added to the charm to have because the expectation.
It gave it a good mystery.
Yeah, it made it so the expectations of the two characters were not correct about each other and what kind of society they came from. The guy assumed that the girl must know who he was or like who his people were, and things like that, and she was from a group of people who knew nothing about him, so everything was it was really neat to see their false expectations about each other as they overcame them. I thought that was well done.
Oh, thank you. I really enjoyed playing with it because we had this situation where they had these misconceptions about each other, and I think a lot of romances are like that. Men and like the whole men are from Mars and women are from Venus.
It's like Pride and Prejudice in space.
It is exactly that, and I've had it compared to that many, many times, and I think it makes some people cringe.
I think it's charming.
Anyone who loves Pride and Prejudice isn't going to cringe; they're going to go yes. And the reason Pride and Prejudice is good is that she got the personality types spot on, and they're subtle and complicated. They're not just
and both characters in Mona Lisa's story are very strong, like willed people. Yeah. So it's interesting. It's like interesting seeing those two forces collide.
Well, one of the things I was going for is I was going for the strong woman, not the stereotypical, quote unquote strong female character who has to be the biggest, baddest person in the story. I personally am tired of that trope.
Oh yeah,
me too.
I would rather have a real strong woman.
Exactly.
Her strength doesn't come from being, able to push a guy around and emasculate him. So.
But she's very brave. I mean, she's off in a section of a continent all by herself.
I mean, that's the thing. When I say they're both strong, but they're strong in their natures and their she's not she's not a man with boobs. And she's strong in her
competent and stronger and more competent, and that's exactly what you want in a romance. It's not to say that he trumps her in any way. It's just that her virtues go beyond just strength. But it was as I say, it was just a very wonderful touch for the anthology to have a story that because we had some, I'll talk about Julie's story. We'll read what she said in a moment. She had a very interesting romance idea, but it was not on Venus, and we had other stories we had a couple of other romances on Venus. We had some stories on Venus that were not romances. So it was nice to have this strong Venus romance story that really
felt
kind
very
of
romancy
epitophized, kind of what we wanted to get. Well, I should say before I move on, Mona Lisa, is there more you'd like to say about it? Because I don't want to cut you off.
I'm just glad that you enjoyed it so much and that you accepted it and gave me the chance to have it published. Thank you.
No, you're welcome.
You're very welcome. I want to read what Julie wrote, but Edward I think he has a party to go to or something. Was it you who had a child's party, Edward? I wanted to give him a chance.
It's not a party, but my daughter has a musical theater class that I have to get her to.
Someone else said they couldn't come because they had a 5-year-old with a birthday party, and I'm confusing the two. But anyway, since I know you need to go, I didn't know if you wanted to say anything else about either your story or the whole process or anything you have coming out that you'd like to mention.
Sure, I could mention a couple of things. I did want to say, first of all, that the original play script for the story, which was then called Threads, is on my website if anybody wants to look for it. You can just go to edwardwillett.com, EDWARDWILLETT, 2 T's. .com.
If you want to put it in the chat box here, Jason often will put the links that we collect up on the Superversive website with the Roundtable link.
There it is.
There you go.
And then I guess I'll just mention the couple of things I have coming up. There's a few things that I could mention, but I'll mention the big one is that I have a new novel coming out this fall. Starts a new series. That's from Daw Books, which is my publisher. And that will be called World Shaper. And before that, you can get the paperback, mass market paperback of my last science fiction novel, The City Born from Daw Books will be out in July. So a couple of things to look for from me.
Excellent. And we're still hoping that there will eventually be a space princess in one of your stories.
Yeah.
For those who do not know, Edward Will is one of the founding members of the space princess literary movement. So he has written space princesses, but not recently. We're hoping
kind of. I had a book called Mars Seguro, had a woman in it who was the daughter of a high official on the planet she was on. So princess was maybe stretching it a little bit, but I so much wanted to be part of that movement that I decided that she was a princess for all practical purposes.
Well, I don't want to give Jason a heart attack by suggesting another anthology at this point, but maybe in a year or two, we could do a space princess anthology, and maybe Mona Lisa's a daughter of the two characters from her last story. We just might qualify if she's the heir to an important house or something. And Jason says, I suppose.
Oh, poor Jason.
We won't bring it up just yet, but it's an idea out there. It's for some point in the future. It would be fun to do a space princess anthology.
If we're talking about anthologies, random side note, I think it was Pierce that gave me the idea. An anthology called Mistakes Were Made, a story of bad decisions.
That could be particularly amusing if it was a humorous based, story.
If it's just fun, crazy things gone awry and the title is Mistakes Were Made.
For about 30 years, I've wanted to do an anthology called Footsteps of the Immortals, and it would be about anytime you have something like a Prince of Amber who can walk from one world to another, or a superhero, it would be about the wrecked lives of the people who the super powerful guys walk by their town or something, and the guy wanders into the wrong world and never gets home or something. So there's a lot of cool. Jason says he likes the comedy idea of Mistakes Were Made. So we'll keep these in mind, and Edward, we will definitely let you know if we decide to do a Space Princess anthology at some later point when we've recovered.
Okay, well, thank you very much. I better run.
You're welcome.
Thank you for joining.
Thank you.
All righty, guys. I'm going to read Julie Frost's comments, and Julie, feel free to write more comments as we'll kind of jump back and forth for you here. She says, Ben, the werewolf PI, has PTSD. I should start by saying her story is kind of a I'll read what she says first, and then we'll comment. From 7 months of captivity in Afghanistan when he was in the army. He watched a woman he loved die in front of him, and this is an opportunity for him to save the girl in her story, in our anthology here, and maybe get a little closure from that, because the lady vampire looks a lot like the woman who died. She is at, what does LTUE stand for? I know a lot of people are there. I know it's a convention of some kind, but I'm trying to remember what it stands for. Does anybody know?
Life, the universe, and everything?
Life, the Universe, and Everything. Yes, so she's at Life, the Universe, and Everything right now. She's trying to, and I'm jumping between her two comments. I'm sorry. I because the thing had moved on the side, I read the second one first. So pretend you didn't hear that. And Julie says, my story is set in the universe of my novel, Pack Dynamics, which was a novel that was, just as an aside, it was book bombed by Larry Correia at one point, and he recommends. The protag is a werewolf private eye who finds himself embroiled in vampire politics when a lady vamp approaches him for bodyguard work while she's exposed all the dirty little secrets of her clan and a rival clan. She fell in love with a guy in the rival clan and he was killed over it, so she's understandably quite angry. Then imagine that I just read you the part about Ben, the werewolf PI. So she has a story that's a kind of a Romeo and Juliet with vampires, and her werewolf PI has been hired to protect the vampire who looks like this girl that he used to like, that he had such a horrible experience with. And she's bravely trying to join us from the con. So we are really happy that she's in. And her novel, as I mentioned, is out there and was I got it because I saw it on Larry's book bomb. So I have actually read. No, I don't know if I've read all of it, but I've read a lot of it.
Now, I know when I read it,
book 2 is going to be coming out at LibertyCon. What'd you say?
I'm trying to remember all the things I thought about when I first read it, because I remember I really liked it. I'm trying to remember all the little details I liked about it. One thing I like is, so he has this past experience where there was a girl he liked, she didn't make it, but he has a wife now. And in the wife's only mentioned a few times, but whenever she's mentioned, she's like this sweet supporting character, and so that little detail I liked. And
I liked. Go ahead.
What were you? You can go.
I was just say I like the story for a reason that no one else in the universe is going to like the story, which is that, as I said, I read part of her novel and then I had something come up and I wasn't able to get back to it. So I'd been wondering for some time what had actually happened to Ben. So is explained the novel doesn't come up right away, So when I got to the point, that's why he said
you cheated,
for a reason that's not going to, most other people are not going to be halfway through her book when they read it. Yeah. But so I thought that was fun. But I like her character is very kind of a noir competent guy. Yeah, and he doesn't let his problems slow him down. He knows he has certain problems, and I thought there was a very clever scene where he actually uses his weaknesses to his advantage to get out of a very bad situation. So that was very clever.
And then the ending feels very satisfying. It's a very nice, it makes you feel happy inside at the ending.
You don't think when you go into a story about a vampire whose beloved has been killed that you're reading a romance that's going to have a happy ending. But without giving anything else away, you are.
Yeah, it's great. It was really nice. I like the characters.
Things happen during the story.
I feel like I can't remember exactly what it was, but I feel like there's some different lines or different little things that were said or exchanged, or the way the characters acted that were really fun.
I think both in the book and the story, she has a good sense of comedy and witty repartee and stuff like that. Snarky nicknames, as Julie said. Yeah, she has snarky. In a kind of a, in a noir. I don't know. For those of you who haven't read noir stories, they usually have nicknames for people. They refer to everybody as the gray hat, or and Ben goes a step farther and has snarky nicknames for everybody, which is enjoyable. And adds to the fun of the story.
So this is an example of something that's not exactly on Venus, or not particularly has to do with the goddess, but has a fun love theme in it.
Julie says he calls the bag vamps Rosencrantz and Guildenstern, and of course they do end up being dead after all. Both before and after in two different ways. No, I agree. We did put in a couple stories that were stories that touched on, she says, keeping with the Shakespeare theme, because she has the Romeo and Juliet and she has the the Hamlet tie-in with Ravenscraft and Guildenstern. I don't think I even noticed that. That's very clever. But we, looking at our stories, we had some Planet Venus stories and some Goddess Venus stories, and then we picked a couple of stories that were just romance because we felt that was the theme.
Yeah. And it had
And
this one had a fun like fantasy urban.
Yeah,
we had a couple submissions that like it wasn't even really fantasy. It may have kind of had a little bit of love, or maybe it didn't. There's a couple that we got that were just
we
didn't
decided,
even fit.
Yeah, we
like
decided
any
not
sort of
to
fantasy.
take anything that was romance, but not speculative fiction.
Yeah.
So at first we got a wide range of things, including some romance stories or that were not at all science fiction or fantasy. And after we looked over the other stories, we thought that, you know, they just didn't seem to fit. But we did keep this one, even though it didn't have, you know, the goddess or the planet, because we felt it fit the theme and it was fun. And,
yeah,
and
it was also superversive. It was a very superversive thing with it.
She says, keeping with the, funny enough, I'm actually terrible at romance, so this was a departure for me. And we liked it. We thought, I mean, maybe you need to. I want to say maybe you need to go in that direction because you know, I think you know what you enjoy, but maybe you could try it again sometimes. I guess it was charming.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
All right, let's see. Was it Walter?
Walter, would you like to go next?
Sure. My story is Venus Felix, which is, I believe, Latin for Lucky Venus. And it's essentially a detective story involving trying to get someone from point A to point B, with point A being Mercury and point B being Venus. And these sort of weird and unusual things that happen along the way. I'm definitely influenced by people like Douglas Adams and Terry Pratchett. So I tend to just take an idea and just go left. Which is, I mean, it's about the best way of putting it, because I mean, you know, I mean, half the story deals not so much with romance, but the exact opposite. I mean, you have characters who, you know, truly hate each other, but hatred is, you know, generally the opposite of love. That you can't hate something unless you have some sort of underlying love or desire, and that's why the whole thing with one of the sub characters, Nigel, who keeps being referred to as Major Cliche, you know, his whole hatred of the main character Cyrus, you know, and Cyrus keeps sort of needling him about how, you know, how can you hate me? We just met. You know, it's like just like you can't, the idea of, you know, you can't have love at first sight, or he doesn't believe in it, so you can't have hate at first sight. So that's basically my twisted way of dealing with, you know, stories that's supposed to deal with romance.
And you had a sister rivalry going, right?
Yeah, that too. DX and her sister Mary Sue.
I thought that the sister Mary Sue, who was very good at many things, really amused me. It was you know, it was, the story had just the right kind of mix of action and tongue-in-cheek humor to make it so that was fun and worked rather than you know, strange or obnoxious. But yeah, I think it was a lot of fun. It had the and at first I was like, where is this going? But you know, because you know, as in any action movie story, it starts out in a bar and action breaks out, you know, and so you don't know as you're reading through the story what's going to happen, like why it's going on, you know, but as it comes along, it all starts falling into place, and it all makes sense. So I think it gave it was a little bit like Julie's story in mood. I mean, not a lot, but just if you were gonna, you know, the PI and the kind of action, you know, characters in your story. But it was, you know, went in kind of a different direction with it, and it also was, you know, heading off to Venus. So it was a very nice kind of a bridge between, you know, some of the more romantic stories and some of the more science fiction-y stories. It's kind of more of a action story, and I think that it was fun to read.
Thank you.
Does it fit in with anything else that you are doing? Any other background thing?
Well, the funny thing is, originally I had a different story I was going to do for this, that dealt with it involved the main character Cyrus, but it was going to be a cooking competition that took place on Venus or above it, and the whole idea of like romance and cooking.
Yeah.
But the two things that came up was, one, I realized at one point when I was doing the first draft, I was already at like 12,000 words. And I was just sort of gearing up, like, this is not going to work. I don't have time to do it.
I know that feeling.
Yep.
And the second thing is I was trying to figure out, I was working backwards trying to figure out who Cyrus was. And who some of the characters were going to be. And so I started doodling this idea of, how, who is he? How does he do this work? And then there's a scene in the book where Cyrus and DX are on a ship and they're talking to Mary Sue. And when you read the scripts, I mean, I don't really give a great description of what these characters look like because I want you to imagine them for yourself. But I make it clear that Mary Sue is just basically almost the perfect woman. She's perfect at everything she does, including her looks. And so the call ends, and Cyrus is sort of staring at where she was. And her sister makes a little snarky comment about, none of it's really, And that actually came from a conversation I had with someone when we were watching, I don't know what it was, but it was basically an actress on the television. And the comment I heard from someone was like, none of that's real, right? And so I basically remember that. So I end up sort of like, well, I can have Cyrus here and, who's with him and who's that. And I just end up working sort of backwards and forwards from that one point.
That's really cool. So. Yeah. And it was I thought that was an important moment in the story too, because I think that was an important thing to know about Mary Sue that I hadn't quite picked up on until that point. And from there, the other things that happened as the story continued began to make sense. So, I thought it was quite above just the local snark. It was actually kind of a telling moment.
Yeah, I mean, that was actually the hardest part because, I'm trying to. I'm not saying this is a massive mystery that you couldn't solve, but there's a certain amount. Like I'm trying to figure out how to give clues of what's about to happen without it being too obvious. So I think that was one of the tricks with that scene, because that scene gives you a lot about what you need to know for the end of the story.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
So I mean, I may actually try this year to actually do the original story and try to see if I can get it published. But I do want to. That is my goal, is to have the original Love and Pizza story come out. So,
and then you can be like, "Hey, read this story about these characters in the Venus Anthology, then go read more about them over here."
Exactly.
Or vice versa. Oh, you like these characters in this story? Well, go read the Venus Anthology.
Exactly. And that's a fun way to do it. I think it's fun for the readers. It's fun for the author.
Speaking of kind of things like that, Jaja, you could take a turn talking about your story, because that takes the characters in that take place.
It's funny you said that, because I was just thinking that this was a perfect tie-in to your story. April has actually plotted out a story for each of the Planetary Anthologies with characters who are the stories are related, but they're all standalones, but they're all within the same families and background over a period of a couple hundred years, right? Is it
a couple thousand?
Couple thousand years. So why don't you go ahead and talk about that, because it seems like a perfect lead-in.
Okay, so as Joji said, it starts from the order that the anthologies are being released is not the order that my timeline goes. But basically, it's about a 3,000-year timeline. I have the descendants of Yuri Gagarin and Alan Shepard, like just taking that little rivalry between America and the Russians and kind of extending them. Though it changes, like there's points where the two families work together, or not work together, different things. So that's kind of my overall thing that I got myself into, and now I have to see it through. But my story for Venus, the other thing about the timeline is it has 3 little sections. So there's there's groups of stories that take place in kind of an arc, so to say, like a family arc. So some of the first stories will be in this arc where it's kind of more humans have gone into space and we're kind of conquering kind of wild west exploration kind of time. And then there's a handful of stories that are more in the era where we're starting to cultivate and technology and science, and like we're starting to settle ourselves in space. And then the last collection of stories in that timeline will be when there's like royalty or like grand things happening and maybe like going off further into the universe. But with that in mind, my Venus story takes place in kind of the first arc where it's still the beginnings of space colonization. And it's a story about these gypsies. And there's one gypsy, he's a boy, and he decides he doesn't want to be trapped in the band anymore. Like, the band travels around, goes to different sections. They have these, I never gave a whole lot of description of them, but they're these kind of like ships that can kind of like all clump together to travel somewhere and then kind of spread out. The story, the idea started from a conversation with my brothers where they were saying that on Venus there's that one like part of the atmosphere, like in the clouds, that's actually livable for humans. So I was like, well, I'll just have a floating city. Like, they were saying they wanted to build a sky city because my brothers are always talking about things they'll build. So they said they'd buy like a sky, or it was like kites, like a kite city. So I was like, well, if I put like these zeppelins or dirigibles, like these gypsies on dirigibles in that layer of Venus, that they could just kind of like live there. So that's where they're stationed in part of this story. And so there's a boy, he wants to go to the stars. He doesn't want to stay with the gypsy band because there's more out there. He wants to see it. There's a girl that's like his best friend. He left when he was pretty young, like right as he turned probably into his teen years. Because it's the beginning of space exploration. People probably don't live that long, so you've got to grow up pretty fast. And she, even back then, she liked him. She thought a lot of him. And she knew that if she tried to keep him with her, he would be miserable. And so she let him go. But she never forgot about him. And the story, when I plotted it, I actually only wrote the last scene of it. Like, I had this whole thing plotted, and then looking at the way my other stories were turning out, I was like, we had already gotten a lot of good stories for Venus. I was like, I can't have like another 10,000 word story. So I need to condense this somehow. So I took the last scene and weaved in the information throughout it. And I liked how it turned out because it's kind of this back and forth. The way it's written is a back and forth between their two perspectives of the boy that's gone off to the stars and the gypsy girls that's still there. Now, the boy at this point has realized what he left behind, and he wants to come find her. But the question is if he'll get back to her in time. So I don't want to give too much away. Jaji's read it, so if she has any more like thoughts or little things, she can sprinkle in. But that's kind of the basic idea of it, of, what's worth it, going to the stars or being able to have the person you love by your side? I guess is kind of the main theme in a scattered sort of way.
Yeah, and it had a charming sense of the adventure of going into the stars, which is why we opened the anthology with it, because it opened on a very strong that sense of wonder and glory that draws many of us into science fiction to begin with. She captured in the beginning.
Yeah, and at the end they do find, well, I don't know. I don't want to tell you the end.
It's better to leave it open. It comes to a good conclusion, though.
Mm-hmm.
And and as April said, she has very light connection between her stories. It's not the same characters because they're separated in time, and they're not in any particular order. It's not like Mercury was the first one, and it's like that.
Like this,
but I'm hoping eventually she'll put them together in a.
They can, someday they can be compiled to their own little book. So then you got all the stories nice and lined up.
Yeah, exactly. And then you'll be able to kind of see them together. But in the meantime, it's fun to have a kind of it's nice when we have a series of anthologies like this to have some authors reappearing. Whether it's, sometimes a couple that's like, we have a story by Josh Young that's the same character who appears in the Mercury story.
Yeah,
And,
and is it a prequel to that or a epilogue to it? I can't remember.
Can't remember if he said it was a prequel or an epilogue right now. And I've only gotten through some of the Mercury stories, so I'm afraid I can't answer that question. Maybe Jason knows. But one of the things that was fun about Josh's story was that it was the only story we got that was in the Edgar Rice Burroughs type of Venus, with jungles and tribes and rushing around with knives and so Jason, we were wondering if you knew if Josh's story in Venus was a sequel or a prequel to his story in Mercury, and if you don't, that's fine. But
No,
anyway,
I know.
oh no, I do know it is a sequel because he has with him something he got from the previous story, and it's one of the things the plot's about. So it is definitely
that story is very. It's sort of hard. I forget what the ending was. Now it's been a while since I read it, but it was definitely a very kind of like deep, emotionally charged story about him, guy, and then.
It is a story in the in the John Carter Conan kind of style of stories where the guy is has a cursed object and there's a girl who's going to be sacrificed and he's trying to save her and they're on the run and things go wrong and then he tries to undo some of the damage and it has I was very happy to have a story like that because I think that part of the science fiction tradition for Venus includes those kind of stories, and it would have been a shame not to have one. I wanted to also add for Julie Frost mentioned she has quite a few short stories out that are set in the Pack Dynamics universe, and on her website she has a list of them, and maybe Jason will put her link up when he puts up the other links too, towards the end there. Mm-hmm. And so anybody who's interested in, who enjoys the Romeo and Juliet in space.
It's Romeo and Juliet and vampires.
Not in space, in vampires. Can go on to enjoy other stories with the main character who's pretty
he's a
good guy. Pretty fun guy too. I don't know, good guy's quite the right word. But he's a fun character to read. So
yeah. Well, then, do you want to take a chance to talk at your story? Do you know if there's any of the other authors that will join us?
I don't know. There were a couple other authors who said they might have a chance. I just sent out a little note to let them know that if they're available, that we do have room. If they show up, great. If not, I think you and I could kind of go back and forth.
We can talk about the different stories that are in it.
Different stories a bit, and if someone else shows up, great. And if Julie or Walter would like to say anything else about their stories or other works they're working on, just let us know, and we'd be happy to give you a shot. I will say briefly about my story, and that is that the first series that I had published originally came out from Tor, and now it's out with Wordfire, which is Kim J. Anderson's publishing company.
Much better covers too.
Yeah, with much better covers. Is called Prosperous Children, and it is a sequel to Shakespeare's Tempest. Its setup is that it takes place in the modern day. Miranda is still around. She and her younger brothers and sisters are trying to help their father protect mankind from the supernatural world, and her father goes missing.
And all y'all need to read it because it's awesome.
That's how I met April. She loved the book.
Yeah.
And she wrote me a letter. So that's how we came to know each other and to edit, because we knew each other.
This was a really fun project because I went from, I wrote a letter to you like years ago being like, oh, I love the Prospero thing. And now we're editing books together. It's great.
Yeah.
Plus you found my fiance. So that's also a plus.
Yeah. So when it came around to writing the Mercury story, I decided there was a spot in the Prospero books where Miranda is surprised that a brother that she doesn't get along with.
Jason helped too. Jason helped with my fiance.
Jason definitely helped too. A brother that she doesn't really get along with, she discovers is on a first name basis with the Swift God. And so when I wanted to write a story about Mercury, I thought, how did they come to be on first name basis with each other? So I wrote a story about how Erasmus Prospero came to be on a first name basis with Hermes, and the charming gentleman with the huge red beard who has read some of our stories aloud has narrated this story. I'll see if I can find the link and put it up there at some point.
I'll find it.
And it's funny because since the Prosperos had been living in Scotland at that time, he gave the sarcastic Erasmus a charming Scottish accent, which I thought was delightful. I mean, it didn't fit my idea of what the character's like in general, but I thought it made the story a lot of fun. And Ken is also narrating the entire Venus anthology for us, so you'll all be able to hear him if you want to once that's available. But anyway,
sorry, he's narrating Mercury. I have someone else in mind for Venus.
Sorry, I meant Mercury. I thought Mercury. If I said Venus, that was entire. He's narrating Mercury. And we have Venus. We thought would be good to have a lady, but the Mercury. So anyway, so fast forward to Venus. April and I were editing, and I thought the book was getting too long. We had some really great stories. We didn't, it was a little longer than we had wanted it to be, and we thought we were going to get one other story that didn't get done in time, which would have been fun. But so I wasn't going to write a story, and then I had this idea for a story that takes place after my Prospero's Children's of what Miranda's honeymoon in fairyland would be like if they ran into the goddess Venus. So I managed to write the story, probably the shortest short story I've written in many, many years. I managed to make it short enough that I thought we could sneak it in. And it was a lot of fun. And it was a lot of fun because the goddess wants them to carry a Valentine for her, and who she wants to give it to turns out to be extremely unexpected. So
yeah, I like it because it's. I mean, I love the Prospero setting, and I love seeing the little honeymoon and stuff. And there's a more than just the goddesses and goddesses involved. There's an extra little thing that helps Miranda out in the story.
Yeah, it was actually a nice step in Miranda's life, dealing with a problem that was still open at the end of the series, and I managed to get the goddess and the planet into the story. Yeah. So I was really excited.
Yeah, it was just fun,
and it's kind of fun.
And it was going back to like the whole love thing with the goddesses is okay. I forget there's not too many of the stories that have like the actual goddess in it. I'm not sure if there's any others besides yours. Was there?
Well, there was Edward's, but she's more symbolic. I mean, she's in there.
This is much more. Yours is more of the kind of Greek.
Mine's more on the funny side, and the goddess actually appears as a character and talks and interacts with people,
so,
that was one reason why I wrote it. I thought, we need a story that has Venus kind of much more on stage, so
so that was really nice having the anthology. And it was also, I don't want to give away too much of the theme and like what the goddess is actually after, but it's a really nice story to have, especially this day and age of like. I'm not going to spoil it, but it was a nice touch.
I will merely say that the two stories with the goddess in this anthology are about as opposite as they could possibly be.
That is really true. Oh my gosh. I didn't think about that before.
They're both good on their own. Good. Do you want to just mention, we can kind of switch off? Do you want to mention a story that comes to mind that we haven't mentioned yet?
Yeah, we can do that. We can talk about
and then I'll just do one and we can do that. I have a list of them here. So go ahead and whichever comes to mind. We mentioned Josh's story. We've mentioned Walter and Julie, who is, again, if you guys have anything else you want to add, come right back in. We've mentioned Edward's and yours and mine and Mona Lisa's. So pick another one.
Okay, let me think. Let's see. So I think the first story for the anthology I read was David's, the
Morning and Evening Star?
Yes, it's that one.
Yeah.
That one was fun. The character, it's fun because at the beginning, it's again, the perception is a little bit off between the two characters. So the newlyweds, a husband and wife, when you look at their inner dialogue side by side, it's kind of hilarious what they're thinking. A little bit like the woman's thinking one thing, like, oh, he's looking out the window because he doesn't care about her. But really he's thinking, oh, I hope she'll like this palace that I've made for her.
just for the setup, it's a couple who are honeymooning in the atmosphere of Venus, where he has built this castle, and she's like a girl from a very rich family, and he's like an entrepreneur. So just kind of the setup, and again, it had a nice, really solid Venus science fiction-y part to it.
Mm-hmm. So, do you want to take one?
Sure. I'll talk about one of our most unusual and kind of almost out of place stories was Happiest Place on Earth by Misha Burnett.
Mm.
And I tried to get Misha to put the story on Venus, and he wouldn't. He said it had to be on Earth. So it was kind of an odd thing to put in, but it was such a strangely beautiful story about such an unexpected love that we felt it fit, because we did want to touch on love that wasn't just romantic love. And it's about some kind of AI creatures in a amusement park as the very last humans are
it's
dying.
Also, it talks about love, but I feel like it also kind of touches on like having a purpose in your life, even if you're like an AI.
And he put little touches in that tied it into the theme and stuff, but it was such a charming and unexpected story. You know, it's a sad story rather than a happy one, but it's
kind of a sad, sweet story.
I thought it gave kind of depth to the book that it would otherwise not have, to have something that was like this. It was a little out of step with what you might expect, but it was a beautiful story. You know, and so I was really glad that he sent it to us, and that we were able to use it. I don't want to say too much about it because it's not. Yeah. It's short.
I think that's good.
It's quite. It's one. You know, it's a bittersweet story.
Yeah. Speaking of love that's not romantic, we chose the ending one.
Yeah.
You have all the titles. I can't remember titles.
Yeah, Stones in High Places by Jane. I think it's Lee. I think she said her name was pronounced Liebeck.
Yeah, Jane Liebeck.
Yeah. We put that one last. Go ahead.
That one has a very it's a love of a different kind, of more of a protective love rather than a romantic one, and it's kind of like it's a life-giving love where it's like laying down your life for another kind of love.
It is.
And it's on a very big scale. I don't want to give too much away either on that one, but it's on a very big scale, and it's very kind of Superversive in a way of like the sacrificing.
It was
to give others a chance.
It was one of the strongest science fiction stories that we got.
Yeah.
I mean, it really is a full immersion in a totally new science, you know, it's the word I'm looking for, culture on another planet. And it takes you a while to figure out exactly where you are and what's going on. And when you do, there's this moment of chills when you begin to realize what's going on and what a vast thing they are considering doing, and how touchingly
we were reading
noble.
That while we were driving somewhere, weren't we?
Yeah, we were, and we were both, you know, just like you could kind of begin to see where it was going, and you're like,
yeah, we'd kind of be like start making comments at each other, like, oh, I think it's going to go here, or maybe it's going to do this.
And as we went along, it was like, and part of it was the science of it, and they described the science of what was going to happen if a certain thing happened. I was like, wait a second, I recognize that description of that planet, but I don't think that's the planet where that happened. You know, it just takes a while, you know, and you start going along and you begin to realize what's happening and how, and it was just was so beautifully filled with love without being any type of love one normally comes upon, that we really thought it was made a nice last story. And it also had a nice, you know, just a nice, just general science fiction feel to it. So
yeah, it was definitely a good closing.
That was really good. Would you like to take another one, or that was that you? That was you.
I think that was me. Yeah.
Okay. 90 seconds by. I think it's Bokira. I would say Bokira, but I think it's Bokira Brumley.
And that's the story that the cover. The artist that did the cover used that story
as his inspiration.
As part of the cover. Yeah.
And that one is about, I thought that was kind of a real cool idea. The guy is a video blogger who goes and commits extreme sports in order to get blogging attention.
And he has a very worried mother at home who thinks she'll
He has
never
a very
get grandkids.
worried mother who's trying
and
to
a very
matchmake
nosy
for him.
mother, as it turns out.
And he decides to go. It's like I can't remember if it was skydiving or
It's like-
bungee jumping, but
No, it's skydiving. It's like
on Venus. He's going to Venus to go diving into the atmosphere, which of course has all sorts of dangers related to it. And when he gets there, he finds out his mother is trying to matchmake for him, and it goes unexpectedly.
yeah.
She's actually
So that
hired
was
a
fun.
matchmaker, and it goes unexpectedly. So
Mhm.
that, and
But
that was
who
a
is the
fun.
matchmaker?
I thought the whole, kind of video blogger vibe was well done, and
Kind of like a
the story
lonely
went
bachelor.
quickly. It had a nice speed to it. Moved along at a nice
Mhm.
clip, and it had a nice end. So that
Yeah, it was pretty enjoyable.
Yeah. The Wrong Venus.
Oh, that one's an example of it didn't really have the goddess or love, but it was amusing and had Venus, but not the Venus you're thinking of. Also a hardened, a mastermind, a master escape artist, criminal.
So Lou Antonelli, who wrote the story, is familiar with a town of Venus somewhere in the world that
We won't
comes
say.
up in the story, and of a prison there. And so he had the concept of, what if there was a maximum prison on Venus, and what if there was some confusion between these two? And his story reminds me of the kind of stories that I would read in science fiction magazines when I was a kid, in that it's kind of fun. It doesn't take itself very seriously. It has fun science fiction concepts that are, where it's not a like nuts and bolts story, but it's more like, hey, these concepts are kind of neat. What could happen with them? And it was just so witty, and it was tempting to go to Venus at least. So
Yeah.
we
It
were
was also
really
the
amused.
only submission we got in paper.
Yes, he decided to type it. So Lou decided to type the story at a convention. And he sat there in public and typed up the story. It took him like 2 hours or something. And then he submitted it on paper. And we read it. And, later on, he sent us a polished version. But we were just so amused and delighted by this, kind of almost a, arcane manuscript that had come into us. It was such a charming thing to do. And he beat that record and produced a story in like an hour since then for another anthology. But he still did pretty well with ours.
Give me those powers. I need them.
Yeah. Well, he's been at it a long time, and he
true.
works. He does good work. So anyway, so his is one of the ones I mentioned. We had some lighter ones that we put between the others that kind of kept the spirits up occasionally.
Yeah.
Mine was one of the lighter ones. His was one of the lighter.
There's also
another
a cat.
one. Yeah, the other one that we put in as one of the slightly lighter ones was called First Cat in Space. And it's hard to say too much about it without giving it away. But it was short and extremely charming. And, just, and there was some real science fiction about Venus in there too. So, I just thought that one was kind of a really fun thing to have in the anthology.
Now, jumping gears, so we have short ones like that, but then we also have, the title, is it like Venus, 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 by
Yes. Venus
Vanessa?
Times 3. Yep. That one is by Margaret. I'll have to check exactly. St. Albans, I think it is. I'll check her on her name exactly, and I'll be right back. But go ahead and talk about it while I look it up.
Okay, so we have some that are short, fun ones. This one's a much kind of a longer chewed one where it's got more detail. It's kind of a mystery in a way, like a murder mystery, and you've got these brothers that are, I think, lawyers that come in.
Margot St. Albin, and for some reason I had remembered it as Margaret, but Margot St. Albin. Go ahead.
So, you have these brothers that come in. They're lawyers, and I believe they're also friends of the family. And you have this whole situation. It's kind of one of those ones that you kind of got to sit down and like let yourself kind of get into it to see like all the parts that start coming together. And like build, it's really got a lot of build up and little details and things that come in at the end. But that one's pretty fun. It's got a bit of a twist at the end. So we've got short stories, we've got kind of lighthearted, some like romantic ones. And then we've got like mysterious mystery ones that are kind of like.
And this one was like a traditional mystery in a way. And I mean, there was the lawyers are coming with the will. They know the family.
It reminded me of Clue, where it's like who did it where.
It's like Clue in space. And the thing that was interesting about reading it was Clue in space on Mars. So you're reading along, and you're like, what does this have to do with Venus? But it does have to do with Venus quite a bit. So, in fact, it turns out the part of what's being transferred is that the family who's had the death in the family owns Venus. So it's quite charming as it goes along, and it's quite interesting what she does with it. So. Maybe I shouldn't have given that away. I apologize, but I thought I think that's just adds to the story. Yeah, it adds to it. I think to know it's kind of neat. And then we have a very light, fun story called "Love Boat to Venus."
That was Declan Finn.
Yeah, Declan Finn, which I thought was just a great idea. First of all, just the idea of "Love Boat to Venus" was really funny, and this story involves characters from his. From some of his other books. His character has a long name, and it's Sean Patrick something Ryan, and I'm embarrassed now. I can't think of the whole name. But it's he's his character Sean and his wife Cammie, who's a charming, very kind of wise martial artist young woman, or they're not young at this point because they're kind of over 100 years old, I think. But they're trying to take a young friend of theirs and her young man on a trip and get to know him. But because this comes from an action background, the story
there's more than talking
has both action and romance in it. So it's really cute and fun.
Yeah. That one's kind of a fun, quick, actiony, punchy read.
I'm trying to look up the name of his character. John Patrick Ryan is the name of the character, I believe, and I think he had a fourth name that it's not coming to me. But anyway, I've read other books in this background that are fun, and they have kind of like a Rangers in space thing going, and these are like the Rangers on their vacation day. So
yeah,
it's
definitely it's a fun little one. So what else? You have the list. What else do we have?
Well, we have Avalon by Dawn Witzke.
I think it's Witzke.
Who's one of our loyal people at Superversive
She's
Press.
Also apparently okay. So rumors has it that I'm not the only one to use the exclusive. Okay, so apparently Superversive Press is not only a publishing house. Apparently, it is also an exclusive matchmaking site.
Because Venus blessed us because we wrote an anthology. In her
apparently,
paper. So
because
rumors are that Dawn has become engaged, but she's not going to reveal the details to LibertyCon. So
I know. So apparently, I think she said it's one of us, but we don't know who, and it kind of bugs me.
It's someone who's interacted with the.
I know who it is.
No, Jason! You know?
I'm telling you.
The cruelty of Jason.
Oh, the matchmaking. My matchmaker heart can't take this.
We are the writing and editing grunts.
For any single author out there, yes, apparently we run a dating site as well.
Yeah, so give us your stories to publish. You might find your future.
Yeah, and let us know. Which of you guys are single. We can try to introduce you.
We'll help you out. We gotcha.
So maybe our readers will go out and influence the life of the readers. You can read it and be blessed.
Hang on. I got a slogan for Superversive Press. Great fiction brings great people together.
It's actually pretty good.
It's very true.
So back to her story. Avalon is about two young men who happen to be named after Arthurian characters. So it's Arthur and Merlin have arrived from some backwater place or maybe it's not that backwater, but some other place.
I don't think it was backwater.
Where I thought there was something, but he may have been just being kind of rude about it when he said. But anyway, they come from another place where Arthur is the king and Merlin is like his sidekick, and but
all Arthur can do is think about what he's missing at home, and all Merlin can do is look at all the new things, the opportunities.
He's in this new place where he's no longer under the shadow of his friend, because when I said Blackwater, it's not that their place is necessarily Blackwatery, but that nobody here really cares about it. So he's suddenly, for the first time, out from under the shadow. So it's kind of a Merlin from the British TV show, comes to Venus. And but it was a very charming, interesting school where they were studying magic, I think. And Merlin finally has a chance to make a friend, but it looks like the being that he's picked as his possible friend, everybody who talks to him tells him is actually going to eat him.
Yeah.
It's a siren. It's just sirens just kill people and they're just sucking you in. So Merlin has to decide whether his idea that this person looks like it might be a friend is true, or whether he's just being deceived. And I thought that made for a nice story.
Mm-hmm.
So,
speaking of Arthur things, the story I'm writing for I got for Jupiter is actually based off of a Arthurian tale I wrote a while ago. Yeah. So I'm in the process of spaceanizing that.
So it's going to be Arthur in space.
Yeah, basically. Well, Arthur on the moons of Jupiter. So that's a little side note. The problem is I have to make it into my overall background. But I think it's starting to come together. So it should be good.
And we're all looking forward to the later stories in your cycle. We have 4 more stories, I believe, that we haven't covered. One of them is A Rocket Raising by Fred Himmerbaugh. I'm not sure how to pronounce his name. It's a problem with being a writer on the world of webs that we don't really know. But so rocket raising is like a barn raising. The same way that when you do a barn raising, you get together and raise a barn among the Amish. This was like Amish in space.
Yeah, and what's really interesting about this one was the concept of like, okay, you have these separate Amish groups, different places, but they, you don't want inbreeding or stuff. And so every once in a while, one of the tribes or groups will make a request for some of the people from another tribe to come and marry their people, so that you still have a spread of genes going around and have a healthy gene pool.
They have this kind of science fiction version of the fact that towns will swap young men and women so that they keep their gene pool fresh, so to speak.
But with this being space, you leave and you don't really have a chance to come back to your home.
Right. You can't make the 20-mile trek back by horse cart. You're leaving on a one-way through space, and basically that's it. So one young woman and they don't make anybody go. They have a kind of a roster they go down, but if a person has a choice whether they want to go. So this young woman has come up. She's next on the roster, but she has a young man that she's interested in. And so the question is she going to accept this, what she feels is her duty, or is she going to say no and try to start a life with this young man? And she comes up with a clever solution to that, and it was really,
we won't spoil it, but it is she finds a third option that no one else was expecting,
right? And the mood of the whole space Amish who are living on Venus as they prepare to go wherever they're going to go next. At least I assume they were living on Venus. I can't remember right now if he actually said that. I knew at the time. It's been a little while.
It was space.
Yeah. Anyway, it was charming, and I thought it was, quite interesting take. So, 37 Shades of Yellow.
I like that one. That one was
hilarious title.
Yeah.
To begin with, because of course the terraformed Venus is filled with yellows. It's all sulfurous, before it was terraformed. So it has yellows of all kinds. So he actually has 37 shades of yellow. And that's J.D. Beckwith.
Yes.
Who has had
now
stories.
The title's kind of amusing, though it doesn't really give you too much. It doesn't tell you a lot about the story. It doesn't
No,
do a lot
it's a charming and funny riff rather than really telling you much about it. Yeah. Though there is a kind of a sand garden of different colors that they do pass by in the story, so you kind of tied it in.
I think someone has some sand on their desk, but it's interesting. It's basically got two couples in it. One's kind of like a beginning romance that's kind of cute that I liked, and then one's like a newlywed couple, and they've come to Venus to live there, but there's kind of been like a lack of communication between them to where now the woman says she only wants to go back to Earth. She doesn't want to be here, but like this is where the man likes to be. And there's a kind of older, wise psychiatrist guy that's in the story. And so it starts out with a very kind of fast-paced scene and kind of moves to the kind of new romance, and then also it hints a little bit at the second couple, and then goes into the second couple, kind of all ties in at the end.
What's neat about it is that these two couples are kind of the story deals with the fact that they have a new terraformed Venus with an outpost, but they can't get people to stay there, and then it's not going to succeed unless they can get people to stay. And so the story is partly about the couples and partly about the other fellow who's working towards the goal and has his own idea about what could be done to try to get people to stay here, and it's charmingly put together.
Mm-hmm. So that one was fun. I enjoyed that one.
We have two left, and the first one is Foxfire by Daniel Ackley McFeel.
Yes.
Which was I would say that's also in the category that, in my mind at least, of Venus times 3, where you want to kind of sit down and let yourself kind of get wrapped up into it, because there's a lot of little details, and it's kind of a slow build up. No, not super slow, but kind of a build up of different things that's happening. And it's also a bit like Julie's story in that it's not really about, it's a love story rather than about Venus.
Mm-hmm. It's a good.
It is about a romance between a Kitsune and an American Indian living in America. During the time of when the Indians were, a couple hundred years ago. And it deals with the fox and coyote kind of playing chess against each other in this attempt to the main character, the fox girl, is trying to get closer to a young man, and the other spiritual forces are trying to get in her way, and it's really interesting. I thought it had
they got a very kind of fairy tale-ish, like almost spooky fantasy feeling and style to it.
Yeah, and I think fairy tale is a good. It had a folklore fairy tale feel, which is a bit different than the others. And as you're right, that is a bit longer, so you can really kind of immerse yourself in it. And again, it kind of gave another aspect to it. It wasn't we have a number of science fiction stories, and this one was.
We have some science fiction, some urban fantasy, and then this one was definitely very folklore.
And then the very, very last story was called Smiley the Robot.
I think this is like the one. I think there's two stories I never actually got to read because I got so busy. I was like towards the end, like it's towards Christmas.
One of them was I found out was because the email that had gone out to you never went. And I apologize for that one.
Okay. But so I'll let you talk about this one. I know I need to read this at some point, but
you definitely should.
I trust your judgment. It was good.
Smiley the Robot is written by Amy Sterling Kessel. I know her pretty well, but I don't know how to pronounce her last name. Who is she's actually a Nebula Award winner. She won Nebula many years ago so many years ago, but some years ago, back when the Nebula was still really good, for science fiction, and so she's had stuff published in quite a few places. She's probably one of the more established science fiction writers that we, were so lucky as to have stories from. But this one was really interesting. It takes place on Venus, but it's kind of a terraformed Venus that's more like a kind of an everyday type place, and it's about an old lady and a robot who's a policeman who become friends in a world where both of them are quite out of place, and it's actually a romance, even though it's the main character. One main character is a robot. So it was charming, and it was a nice addition to being both a romance and love, in and of itself, and taking place on Venus. So that's our next to last story, and I think we've covered them all at this point.
Yeah. So as you can see, it's got a very wide variety in this anthology, where you have, if you just kind of want to pick up the book, have something fun, or if you want to sit down with like a cup of coffee or something and have an interesting one to kind of delve into. We've got fantasy, we've got sci-fi, we got urban. All of it we tried to get things that had a sort of interesting, fun, speculative theme, and then touched on either love, the planet, the goddess, or all of the above. So I'm really happy with how it turned out. It was a fun project to work on.
I really think it was. I really liked that we kind of, had a nice kind of a roller coaster of differences, so that as you're going along, it's not all the same thing. But then we started with your inspiring opening, and we ended with a really strong anchor at the end of a story that really kind of encapsulated a lot of what we would want to say. So I think it was, hey, Jason, are you there? I think it was. I think we're basically done, unless there's anything else that either you'd like to say. Thank you, everybody, for listening, and I hope you enjoy the anthology.
Yes. All right. And